Legalize it and I will analyze it. A biomedical case for full cannabis liberalization in the Caribbean. The recent CARICOM report on marijuana, the scientific name for which is cannabis, was unanimously presented by the region's leadership and lends strong support to the liberalization of marijuana in the region, citing strong historical, cultural, and mounting scientific evidence. The title of this report is perhaps telling: Waiting to Exhale, Safeguarding Our Future Through Responsible Socio-Legal Policy on Marijuana. All of this is taking place in the context of growing liberalization in the USA, and most recently Canada. But in fact, cannabis has long been part of the medical pharmacopoeia of humankind. The first known medicinal use of cannabis is found in China in the Compendium of Materia Medica, dating back to Emperor Li Shizhen in 2700 BC. Therefore, it is thought that cannabis has been in medical use for at least 5,000 years. Indeed, since its domestication in East Asia in about 12,000 BC, cannabis use spread to the Islamic world on the Arabian Peninsula, to Western Europe and East Africa, and then to the rest of Africa. Enslaved Africans brought the knowledge of the cannabis plant to the Caribbean and South America during the transatlantic slave trade, but interestingly, North America was the last part of the world to adopt cannabis use. Cannabis was largely used as a fiber in the West, so-called hemp, which is non-psychoactive, but Western medicine was largely ignorant of the medicinal benefits of cannabis. It was not until the 1840s that medical cannabis use was described in Western medical literature, and the person largely credited with introducing cannabis into Western medicine was Sir William Brooke O'Shaughnessy, an Irish professor at the University of Calcutta in India. Performing experiments on animals and humans, he was able to significantly alleviate epileptic seizures in an infant. But despite widespread use in Western pharmacopoeia in the latter half of the 1800s, prohibition began in the 1920s in the USA, culminating in the designation of cannabis as a Schedule I drug, a category defined as drugs having no medicinal value and high potential for abuse. Following suit, the UN Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs in 1961 led the prohibition of production and supply of cannabis globally. There was a lot of time lost in terms of research on medical cannabis during this time. And yet, despite decades of prohibition in the Caribbean, cannabis has been widely used in the region in a variety of formats and for a variety of purposes. The best known is being demonstrated by Mr. Marley on the left, smoking a joint or spliff. But also, traditional Caribbean use of cannabis has included use in food preparation, such as soups, cookies, and cakes, soaking the leaves in white rum to make a tincture that can be used topically, and boiling the leaves in a tea for topical or oral use. These remedies have been used for pain, asthma, stress, rheumatoid arthritis, among other ailments. So what is this mysterious and controversial plant? The genus Cannabis L belongs to the Cannabaceae family in the order Urticales in the plant kingdom. There are 3 species of Cannabis L: Cannabis sativa, Cannabis indica, and Cannabis ruderalis. These species differ in their appearance as well as in their psychoactive effects. There are over 700 known compounds in the cannabis plant, but the 2 groups of chemicals receiving the most attention currently are the cannabinoids and the terpenoids, both of which are found in the resins secreted by the trichomes in the buds, flowers, and leaves of the plant. Although there are 113 cannabinoids, the two that are of primary interest are delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, which has psychoactive effects, and cannabidiol, or CBD, which does not have psychoactive effects, on the other hand. Little is known about the terpenoids to date, but they are known to work synergistically with the cannabinoids to impact the psychoactive effects of the plant. Recently, there has been increasing interest in medical cannabis usage, mainly due to the discovery of the endocannabinoid system in the 1990s. The endocannabinoid system is modulated via two receptors, the CB1 and CB2 receptors, which are distributed throughout the body. The CB1 receptors are located mainly in the central nervous system, whereas the CB2 are located mainly in the organs and periphery. These receptors are ordinarily activated by endogenous cannabinoids, and THC is similar in structure to these endocannabinoids, and so it too activates the endocannabinoid system. The role for CBD is less well known, but it is thought to modulate or temper the effect of THC, decreasing the psychoactive effects. It may also bind indirectly to the CB1 and 2 receptors to modulate the action of THC binding the receptor. Activation of the endocannabinoid system by either in endocannabinoids or by external cannabinoids like THC affects appetite, pain, energy, the immune system, sleep, stress response, and regulation of body temperature. Because cannabis research is still in an early stage, and because of issues with standardization of dosage, the literature lends variable support to cannabis in a number of diseases. Strong evidence exists for cannabis in the treatment of chronic pain, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, and multiple sclerosis. There is moderate evidence for sleep disturbance and asthma, and limited or insufficient evidence for anxiety, epilepsy, irritable bowel syndrome, and cancer, etc., although there are numerous anecdotes of efficacy. There are several medical cannabis strains currently available, which are standardized for THC and or CBD concentration. High THC strains, such as the Dutch Bedrocan, are indicated for pain, multiple sclerosis, insomnia, stress, spasms, glaucoma, and appetite stimulation, whereas high CBD, the non-psychoactive strains, are indicated for epilepsy, psychosis, migraines, depression, and inflammation. The most famous of the high CBD strains is Charlotte's Web, named after Charlotte Figi, a little girl who was able to control her epilepsy with this strain. In order to get around the issue of standardization, several organic and synthetic formulations have used known concentrations of THC and or CBD. These include Marinol, the first FDA-approved synthetic cannabinoid, and Sesamet, another synthetic cannabinoid. And in terms of organic formulations, there was Epidolex and Sativex. Interestingly, the first medical cannabis product, Canisol, was developed in 1987 at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. In this light, medical cannabis research actually began in the Caribbean. There's growing interest around the world in the medicinal benefits of cannabis, but there's also a lot of parallel research going into the adverse effects of cannabis, or more specifically THC, which elicits the major psychoactive effect of the plant. THC causes short-term side effects, including increased heart rate, coordination problems, dry mouth, red eyes, and slower reaction times, as well as memory loss. But these side effects are largely manageable and usually moderate. There has also been concern noted about dependency or addiction to cannabis. But as you can see from the graph on the right, marijuana is less or as addictive as legal substances like alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine. You will also note that marijuana is among the least lethal psychoactive drugs. Another often cited adverse effect of cannabis is psychosis, and it has been linked to increased risk of psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia. Of particular concern are the very high THC strains, which are correlated with a 5 times increased risk of psychotic disorders. However, there's some lingering questions as to whether this represents true cause, or rather correlation. The fact that there has been no increase in schizophrenia incidence at the same time that THC potency in cannabis and it has increased over time suggests a lack of causation. It has been suggested that persons with psychotic disorders may be more likely to self-medicate with cannabis, and this is supported by a recent study showing that people who were genetically vulnerable to schizophrenia were more likely to use cannabis in adolescence. More research is therefore needed to determine whether there is a causal link, even and especially in the specific context of the Caribbean. Regardless, the CARICOM report recommends that genetically modified or artificially bred high THC strains should continue to be prohibited. Hence, governments will need to play a role in regulating THC strain concentration. Nonetheless, overall, cannabis represents a low-risk medicine with great potential benefits that are being recognized and capitalized on worldwide. Here in the Caribbean, there are ample opportunities for cannabis research. We could get into the patenting and standardization of strain varieties, formulations, and dosages for specific diseases. We could become involved in cannabis medical tourism and clinical trials. There is a lot of opportunity for the investigation of other compounds, such as the terpenoids and flavonoids. Overall, cannabis liberalization will enable Caribbean biomedical researchers to contribute to the rapidly growing global knowledge on medicinal cannabis use. Dr. Henry Lowe was one of the early pioneers in medical cannabis research, having been part of the team at the University of the West Indies that patented Canisol for glaucoma treatment in 1987. This was the first ever pharmaceutical formulation of cannabis. Recently, he gave an interview with Ava Russell Turnquest in Bahamas-based online journal JRevLib, and he said, "Well, you know, you're going to be objective and brave when you want to do anything new, especially when bigger forces want to keep you out of it. You're talking about healthcare products, and once you can identify the tagline, then you must educate. It's like aspirin or anything else, or even better. And by the way, aspirin came from the plant."